Now it's time to get on to the super detailing. So I wasn't able to find the official Bowser detailing kit for this since it is long out of production, but Bowser does still have the reference manual available online, so I printed that out and I located every possible part that I could. So I have a bunch of detail parts here. Some of them are close enough alternatives instead of the originals, like these plastic ones here, of course. Those would have been brass with the detail kit. And there were some parts that I was not able to find at all, or some where, well, I had already spent like $50, $60 on these parts, and I just couldn't justify the additional cost for some pieces, at least in my own mind. So I'll recreate some of them along the way. But anyway, let's get started and see how this all looks. First things first, of course, I need to take the body back off. So that's just the front truck screw holding that on. Pull it off the back. So to start, I think I'm actually going to look at a couple of the pieces that fit to the chassis. To start off, I'm mounting the trailing truck plates. I already have one installed that I put on just to test things out, see how they're going to fit. And that all looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and take the rear truck off now just to make it a little easier to install the other one. So that needs to go right here, and I need to drill a couple of holes in order to get that in place. Now these plates do have a bit of an uneven hole position, which makes it a little difficult to measure out the location, so first thing I'm going to do is just clean up the edge of this part, just get that casting flash off of there. Okay, that looks pretty good now. So in order to figure out those hole positions, I'm going to try doing, I'm going to poke this piece of masking tape over that. Tabs went through the tape, and I'm doing the sticky side out this way. So now I just need to trim the edges of this piece of tape. All right, with that trimmed, now I have the piece of tape in the exact shape of the part, along with the locations of the holes. So now what I can do is stick it onto the chassis right where I want the actual part to go. So now I'll just take my drill here, put a touch of oil onto the bit, and I can start drilling. And when I'm drilling holes for parts like these, I like to go just a little bit larger on the bit size than the actual size of the tab, just in case I do make any sort of mistake. That will allow me to move the part around a little bit and get it lined up just right. That's all I need of that tape. So now I can just continue drilling out these holes until they're deep enough for the tabs to fit. Now, one thing about drilling for parts like these that are stationary is that it's kind of a pain to go to the full depth of the tabs that are on the part. So since this one doesn't actually support anything, it just glues to the side, it is no problem at all to trim these tabs quite a bit shorter. That's still more than enough to hold it in place. All they have to do is align it. Now with those drilled, just brush away any excess shavings. Now it's actually best to remove mechanical parts like these, or especially a DC-71 open frame motor first, just to prevent metal shavings and drilling shavings from getting inside. As long as you're careful, you can still do the drilling with the parts in place, but even though I'm doing it that way right now, it is best to actually take them off first. Now, test fitting the part. Looks like I did get really close with the holes, but I'm not quite perfect. So in that case, one thing you can do is just drill them out a tiny bit larger, or sometimes if they're only slightly off, you can just turn the drill slowly while kind of tilting it off to the direction that you need. Just don't do that too much or you could break the bit. But as long as it's done slowly and gently, the bit will survive and it will sort of elongate the hole and allow for some easier placement. So I did end up having to use a larger bit on the front hole there to get things lined up right, but now the part is sitting straight enough in that hole. That looks good. So now I'll just put some glue onto there. And stick it in place. There, that looks good. Since that does fit around the rear truck, I should check to make sure there are no clearance issues, so I'll put that back on now. Let's see. There is that tab there. I actually don't see it in the manual, so I think that's actually just some extra, maybe from the casting process, so I'll file that off. And let's see. The edge there is contacting the flange, so I'm also going to taper that edge off a little. Once that's done, clearance should be all good. Just gently filing that edge, give it a taper. Yeah, that still looks fine. Let's see how it does around the wheel now. Okay, that looks a lot better. Yeah, it needs just a little more clearance, but it is very close. Okay, that looks good. So now I'll get on to the next detail part. Okay, so next up will be the pilot air hoses. Let's get that out of there. So this will fit to the front pilot right here. Let's see. I think this way will be best. Let's see, that bracket goes on top of the pilot. So grip that right there with pliers. Gently bend that. Let's see, does that fit underneath the tank? Well, it's too long anyway, so I'll go ahead and clip off the back. There, that's just barely fitting through. Just line up those rear hoses a little bit. There are no drilling locations for this part. So what I'll do instead, since that's already sitting pretty well in place, I'll just put a bit of glue onto a wire here. And then touch that to a couple spots. Liquid glue will just kind of flow in, helps tack it in place. There, and that'll be enough to hold that part on. Now, next up is these pilot marker lights. So I just need to drill a hole on each side of the pilot, and there are already some marked locations, although some locations I don't know exactly what they're supposed to match up to. Maybe some sort of bracing, but anyway, these far edge ones are where I need to drill. So I've got the appropriately sized drill bit. Once again, just a touch of oil. And since this is one of the white metal parts, this should go pretty quickly. One thing I should mention that I didn't before is after drilling a hole and using oil for it, you'll definitely want to clean that off a little bit. Otherwise, the glue could have some trouble holding. Definitely don't want to put these marker lights in place by hand, because it's just way too hard to get them straight that way. By gripping with pliers, you can hold them exactly where you need to go. I can straighten that just a little more. Okay, now let the glue set and move on to the other one. One little advantage of drilling all the way through is if you feel like you need any more glue for a certain part, you can just put it on the back of the hole, or the bottom of the hole. Let that soak in. So the last detail for the pilot will be the lift bar, and that's one part that I could have purchased, but I'd already invested quite a bit in the other separate detail parts, and at that point I'd already spent more than what the original retail price of the detail kit was, so I decided for some pieces, like a few that I couldn't get at all, or a few small ones that are easy to replicate, I would just copy them off of my L1 Mikado here, which shares some of the same detail parts. Oh, and by the way, this is one of the very first models that I featured on my YouTube channel back when I had a camera that did not take HD pictures, so if any of you were ever more curious about what the detail looks like on this thing, well, here it is. It's a very, very fine model, and I think still some of my best work to date. Alright, so to make these stanchions for the front pilot, I'm just back in my 3D program here, Fusion 360, using calipers to measure off of the 282's parts. I've already taken a couple measurements so that I can get a quick start here. So all I have to do is match those measurements. So there's just the starting size there. So then I can just continue taking measurements of each part as I go along. So let's see what we've got here. That part that holds the bar, a millimeter. That's easy enough. So we'll just go this way, 1/2 millimeter. Make a circle there. And make another one for the hole. And just skipping ahead a little bit here, since I already showed how to do some 3D modeling in previous videos. Pulling this out into an actual part. So there's most of it. I just have a little more tweaking to do on there, and then I can put that through the printer. I've got the stanchions loaded into my program for the resin 3D printer, since that one can do some really fine scale printing. I have just a couple supports for each one. That should be enough to hold them. Okay, I've got things printing in there. That'll take another 20 minutes or so to finish, since these are small parts. I'm using Sorayatec fast resin. I found that this has a good quality finish, low odor, which is especially nice for resin prints. And once that's done, I'll just clean it up and run it through the curing process. Just letting a bit of the excess drain off, and I think that's mostly done now. So I'll transfer that over to the ethyl alcohol bath and let that run for, I think about 5 minutes will do. So that'll clean off any uncured liquid, and then I just let it dry out and run it under the UV light. That just finished, so I will let that sit over here for a few minutes and just dry off. We'll see how things look. Looks like those printed out mostly fine, so now I'll just take that off of there. There it goes. These parts are small, so I'll just set that to 2 minutes. That should be enough time to get them fully cured. And now that those are cured, I should just be able to gently break them off. I'd say those turned out looking pretty good. Just a little bit of cleanup to do on there to make it sit flat, but I think that's going to look just as good as the brass parts when this is done. Now to bend the lift bar, this printout isn't exactly to scale, so I just have to kind of eyeball it based on the image here and comparing that to the actual pilot. first thing to do is bend that little end on there. Now I can check on the height. Let's see. Yeah, right about there should be good. So give that a good hard bend to make sure it's got a nice angle to it. Straighten that out. That looks pretty good. So now I'll just grip it right here and give it another hard bend. A little more. Okay, that's looking good. So at this point, I'll put on the stanchions and then do another bend like this. And to get this to the right size, I bent it to be just a little wider than the mounting holes for those stanchions. So now with that done, I can clip that off. And now this is ready to install. And there it is in place and looking pretty good, I'd say. Moves up and down like that. It is just a little bit tight because the holes ended up slightly undersized, but still worked out just fine. As I was looking at the pilot there, I noticed that there are 2 more pilot holes, which you can kind of see there just behind these stanchions. So there's nothing in the manual or reference manual about that, so I was looking at some photos and found that's where some boiler braces are supposed to go, and those braces also have steps on them, so I'm going to go ahead and make those from scratch using some brass wire here. And the steps I'll just cut out from this piece of sheet brass and solder onto those wires. Braces themselves are really easy to make. All you got to do is bend one end of it, just like that. Change the angle as needed. I think I'll put a little more of a bend on there. And then, once that bend is done, just have to match it up to the boiler and cut it to length. So this needs to go right here. And that should fit just slightly behind the walkway there. So based on the photos I was looking at, right where my fingernail is at is where I need to cut this. So now when I place this in here, right in that spot, put that in the hole, and that's right where it needs to be, I would say. And to make that match up to the boiler better, I'm just gonna file an angle onto the side of it like that, so then I don't have to drill into the boiler and try to bend these left and right as I'm taking the body off and putting it back on. And for the most part, it will barely even be noticeable. And now there are the boiler braces and steps all finished. So you can see just that, kind of see that little angle I filed into the wire on each side so that it helps it to fit better to the boiler. And then the steps, they're just simple little plates that I cut out and shaped, and then used just a little spot of solder to hold each one in place, and that turned out looking good. Okay, before I move on to the boiler, one detail which I nearly forgot is the brake shoes that fit to the pilot truck. I searched for a while to try and find those, either from Bowser or another detail company, but I just couldn't find any that quite matched what they showed in the parts sheet, so I drew these brake shoes up real quick, just kind of based on the drawing. So I'll glue these in with some wire to help support them, and they may not be perfect, but I think it'll be good enough at least. Okay, that should be good enough, and I think that matches the instructions pretty closely. So now I can get on to doing the boiler details. Now getting onto the boiler, I want to start by doing some of the piping details and other parts that involve piping, like these here. So There are some areas where the piping has to go through the walkway, and on models that have die-cast walkways, which is most of them, you would want to mark and drill holes real carefully to go through there, or you would just cut the pipes to stop there and then add another piece down here. But since this one has separate walkway pieces, what I can do instead is mark exactly where I need to put these details. So just to bring this out here so I can figure this out. So just lining things up the way that I need to. Looks like I need to take one little spot out here. So I'll mark that with the knife. Just make a little score mark there so I can find it easily. And there's another small one that goes down next to it, so mark that. And then, let's see, it looks like there are a couple more. There's one right over here, but there's actually enough of a gap in this spot that I don't need to file anything out. I can just place the wire straight between the walkway and boiler. So then going forward a bit more, we've got the two sanding lines, and those need to have at least some alignment with the drive wheel. So I'm just going to stick this back onto the chassis real quick so that I can give myself some point of reference. All right, so let's see, the sanding lines would go between the second and third drivers and in front of the first. So to get those lined up properly, it looks like I need to put one right here, and another one right over here. All right, so now with those marked, take that back off from the chassis, and then take the walkway off from the body. All right, so that comes out. And let's see, yeah, there are the markings I made, very clearly visible. So the next thing I'll do is I'll take a file that has kind of an angle shape to it. So this is a triangular file. That should do a good job for what I'm wanting. So I'll start by just filing some little notches. Okay, so now I've got a little notch there where the pipe can go through, and that can change depending on the size of wire that I'll be using. That should be enough for the sanding line though, especially since there was already a small gap between this area and the boiler. So I'll just continue on with the next few spots. All right, those notches are filed out, and you can see that the wire is now able to pass through. So I can get these details installed. So I'll start with these two here. There's one on each side. I just have to drill a couple small holes, one on each side of this piece here. All right, so I drilled the hole according to the location that's marked in here. So that was just slightly off from where I made the notch in the walkway, but that's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's on there now, but I need to glue it in place. So I'll just take this back out. Slide that back in carefully. Then insert that into the hole. All right, so that is now glued in place, at least at the top. So next I just have to figure out the bottom end of the wire, which it looks like that just goes back and behind the firebox. But it looks like in this case the wire piece is actually too short, so we'll see what else I can figure out there. Maybe I can extend that a little. All right, so I found some brass wire of the same diameter as that there. So I filed the ends of these two pieces as flat as I could possibly get them. So now I'll just tin that a little bit with some solder. I did the same with the wire. So now I should just be able to touch these together and melt that solder real quick. And it also helps to turn things to an angle where you can actually see them properly. Okay, that should do. So now those are joined. What I can do is just carefully bend this where it needs to go. And then cut that right about here, I think will be good. So now I'll just get a good grip there, kind of bend that backward a little bit. Oh, the solder joint's not quite holding up from handling it that way. Got things right where I want them, so now I'll just tack that in place at a couple points with some glue. Alright, so now I'll let that dry and get on to the next part. And of course there are two of these, so same for the other side. Turned out looking pretty nice. Now continuing in the cabin firebox area, I've got the stoker motor right here. This fits to this part right here. And because of the size of it, the tab will just barely be on the edge there. I'll have to drill right about there. So just to make that a little easier, I've cut the tab on there really short. So I only have to drill a small mount into there. And let's see, looking at the reference manual and where that goes, the drill point should be right about here. So just carefully hold the drill in that spot and turn slowly until I can get the hole started. Now the point is marked. Of course, all my drill bits of the correct size have gotten pretty dull. So in order to make this go just a little bit easier, I'll use a power drill right here. Just do that carefully. So when these drill bits start to get dull, they get kind of useless in the little hand drill, but they still have a bit of life left in them when you use a power drill like this. One thing that happens sometimes when you use a dull drill bit, and I think this is going to be the last hole for that one, is it can kind of misshape or distort the metal around the edge of the hole a little bit. So once you're done drilling, you kind of want to just gently file that hole flat. Otherwise it can change the position of how the detail part sits on there. You don't want that. So yeah, it is best to use good tools, but sometimes you can get a bit of life out of worn out and bad ones. A little bit of glue. And just gently stick that into place. Make sure it's sitting straight. Okay, that's in place now. And since that's out of the way of handling, there's pretty much no risk of that coming back off at any time, which is good. So next up will be the ash pans. These are easy to install. You don't have to drill anything. Just have to get a little glue on there. And then just stick it in place right here. These little ribs, you can call them, in here will kind of space it where it needs to be. So just hold that in place for a second. Now for the other side, these ash pans are actually out of production parts, and Bowser only had the left side in stock. Left side left. So because of that, I ended up having to 3D print the one for the right side. To do that, I just took a bunch of detailed measurements with calipers of the original one here, recreated it on my computer, and then just did a reversed mirrored image of it. So I don't know if that's entirely correct for the right side or not, but it's as close as I can get. And once it's all painted, it should look just about as good as the brass part. Yeah, that'll look just fine on there. But yeah, with how much complexity was added, just having to recreate some parts with 3D printing, if you're going to be getting one of these kits, I would definitely recommend looking for the original Super Detail kit so that you don't have to go through all this, because it really makes it a lot easier to have original parts. So the next detail in progress is the injectors here, and these are turning out a little bit tricky for me just because I don't have the proper mounting brackets for them. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of bending things to shape, since these do have, well, these are made from a softer brass, so it's easy to bend these pipes to the shape that they need to be. I also cut the long one from here and spliced it onto this one here so it could go where it needed to go. So that's turning out well so far. Once the glue is dry, I should be able to fashion a little bracket out of some brass strip and glue that into place and make it just a little bit stronger. And speaking of fashioning little mounting brackets, I think I'll have to do something for the stoker motor there, because you can see that it's actually blocking the chassis from fitting back into the body. Just thought I'd do a little test fit there to make sure things were working, and they are not, so at least I caught that before I got too far into it. Okay, I added a little spacer to that stoker motor, and for the injector here, I couldn't quite make a bracket, so instead I made just a wire that I soldered to the part and then glued to a little hole drilled into there. So when you're looking at it from the side or from most any view, the wire's not really visible, and even when it is, it'll be painted the dark green or near black, so it should be barely noticeable anyway. So that should look perfectly fine. And I've got the other injector on there now. Same process as the first one, where I figured out the position, bent a wire to shape to mount it in, did a little bit of soldering and gluing, and that's holding in place just fine. Next thing to go on will be the sanding lines and sanding line valves. So the valves will be the first part to go on, and these come in little pairs like this. All you have to do is drill a small hole right below the sanding dome there, so it mounts to the boiler instead of the dome, but kind of butts up against it. And then I should be able to form the lines from brass wire and solder them together and make that nice and strong. Okay, the part's on there. I got a couple little scratches in a couple spots, but those will cover up. But anyway, I also put the handrail on there temporarily just so that I can check clearances. And after testing a couple things out over here, I decided to go ahead and mount this tank because I'll still be able to take these screws out and mask around here as needed very easily without having to take the walkways off completely. So now I just need to start forming this brass wire. So this is the 0.02 inch, I believe is the measurement. And to get the kind of curvature around the boiler, I'll just kind of take it and do that with it a few times, and you can see that the more I do that, the more it curves out. And that gives you a nice smooth bend. And I can adjust that as needed. Then I'll cut that to shape and give it a couple little additional bends here and there to match up to everything exactly how it's supposed to be. Okay, similar to how the handrails were put together, I'll solder right here, so just a touch of flux. Oh, kind of all or nothing with these bottles sometimes. Oh, that'll wash out, it's fine. I've got the large tip soldering iron here to heat things really fast. So I'll just add a little touch of glue down here too to make sure that it's secure at both ends, and I'll do the same thing with the next 3 lines and a piece on the other side. Okay, that takes care of the standing lines, and on this side I soldered them at both ends, so that makes it nice and strong. And I could have soldered them over here too, but they're inserted under the die-cast parts, so glue is perfectly fine. So now the next thing I'm going to do is some of the really small detail parts that go around the boiler, like some of the little steps, the washout plugs, because by taking care of those really small things first, there's less risk of damaging those because they're really close to the boiler, while I work on other larger parts around in other areas, like the piping that goes down here, and then just a few other parts that go up front in other areas. So let's get on to doing that. All right, so you can see I've got a few of those little steps on now, and to drill the holes for these, since they kind of need to face straight out and not be at the angle of the boiler, the way that I've found is easiest to drill a hole like that. Let's see, the next one needs to go right about here, so I'll start by drilling directly into the direction of the boiler, just to start the hole. But then, as I drill it, I'll kind of gradually change the angle until the hole is being drilled at the angle that I want it to be. It's a little bit of a delicate process, but a few times practicing it, it's actually not hard to do. Got a little bit of glue on the step there. Just align that with the hole. Put it in place. Okay. And now that is on. I'll straighten that out a little bit before the glue dries. And then after that, I'll add maybe just a little droplet of glue underneath to help fill in any sort of gap and strengthen the bond a little bit more. Just like that. Once that's dry, that sup will be holding in nice and strong. At some point I breathed just slightly too hard and lost a whole bunch of the really tiny details, so I've got more printing now. So that's at least one nice thing about being able to print your own details. You can replace them anytime you want. Of course, I still would have preferred to have gone with original brass details, but I'll work with what I've got. The holes for the washout plugs are all drilled, but in order to make sure that they don't kind of stick out too much from that corner there, I'm going to expand just the tops of the holes a little bit with a larger drill bit. I only want to add just a small sort of chamfer there. So with that, it'll be able to sit a little more flush with the boiler. These are probably some of the most difficult and at the same time least satisfying parts to put on just because they're so tiny, but every little detail adds up. Okay, now I have things kind of put together to get a few more details on there, like these M1 builder's plates, which can't really read it right now, but there is actually a little M1 written in there. It's a printed part, probably not quite as good as the brass part, but should be good enough once it's all painted. And to put that in place, I'm putting just a small touch of super glue right where I need it to be, and then really gently setting that in place. And that's turning out nicely, so now I just need to do that to the other side. Then I'm also going to start pre-drilling some of the holes for other details that'll go on later, like these upper marker lights for the smoke box. So I've got one, just kind of the location figured out there, you can see. And then a couple other parts, which this was probably already visible in another shot, but just that pipe there. I didn't have brass wire of the correct size at the moment, so I used some steel wire, which was definitely harder to bend, but turned out fine. And for the last few of the larger details, like this whistle shield here, I'll go ahead and get those on. This one, all I have to do is drill a small hole right behind the steam dome there, and that'll fit right there. And it's got some little support legs on it too, so that'll be 3 little spots of glue, and that'll be enough to hold it on. That'll look really good. And then for some of the other parts beyond that, that'll go on later. I've got this cab deck here, which you can see I printed a little bit of tread work into it. Hopefully that'll show up under the paint, which I'll just put a really thin airbrushed coat on there. That should show up perfectly fine. And that'll have 2 small hook pieces or little ring pieces to hold it on the back, along with some wire once that's done. So I won't have to, I just have to put the little supports there, and that's all I have to glue, and then the wire will go through there to hold it on. All right, I've got a few more parts on, like these little window shades here, as well as these steps under the cab. And then I also started putting these additional front handrails together, and I had actually forgotten about these when I was originally assembling the large handrail here. Since this is all soldered together, I don't exactly want to unsolder that. So what I'm going to do instead, since there are these little boxes that have to go onto there, so I'm just going to clip the handrail right here. So that'll allow me to just put that little detail box piece right there, and then I can slip that handrail back on after painting, glue it in place, and it'll never even look like the handrail was cut in the first place. Just like that. Now next up is the pipes and the piping brackets that go underneath the walkways. So these printed parts, I based them directly on the original CalScale parts, since these came on another one of my Bowser kits, so I could size them exactly. And when you're working with these, first thing you want to do is carefully drill out all those holes to make sure that the wire can slip through easily. And also, the Super Detail Kit only comes with these 4 pipe pieces, but there are a couple spots where they need to be 3. So what you do is you just file those down until you get a nice shape there and it looks completely natural. And for some tight spaces, you can also file the back a little bit here so that it can fit a little better into certain areas, like over here under the or beside the firebox. You have to file them just a little bit smaller so that they fit in place correctly. And as for getting them into the walkways, I'm actually drilling down through the top here, and then I'll kind of finish things off with the file a little bit to make sure that it's nice and clean. So once the pieces are glued in place and nice and firmly on there, I can carefully file and sand those down so that it's nice and smooth, and once it's painted, you shouldn't even see where those holes were at. Now as for the pipes themselves, those are just made from brass wire. And when you're looking at the instruction here, they look kind of complicated. It's just how many there are. But for this one, it's just individual pipes going from front to back, so that makes it nice and easy. And you're basically just following the shape of the walkway here into the path that they need to go. So that makes it really easy to form these. Just take your brass wire, and also, the way to start it is just to take a small end there, give that a hard bend over to get a nice 90-degree angle. And then from there, you just kind of line things up where they need to go. Grab that right there. Give that just a little bend. You only want to do gentle ones here. And of course, you can adjust that as needed. You just keep following along there, and then I'll give it another bend around this area here to straighten it back out. All right, so I think that turned out pretty good there. I'm just letting the glue dry a little more before I file down the tops of those tabs and smooth that out. And to glue those in place, what I did was first I just put the parts into there, and then I put a little bit of glue on the end of a wire, just kind of touched it in there around the top too, and then a little more behind each of the pipes here to help hold them in place. And that seems to be holding nicely, so that should turn out really well. All right, the last of the piping is on the left side now, and I've also installed the rear deck here, which you can see, and that'll be removable until after it's painted. And to get this at just the right position, I mean, there aren't really, aside from the drawings, there isn't a whole lot to go by as far as measurements, so I just kind of compared things until I found a good reference point and put the mounts kind of in the middle of like these 4 rivet heads kind of in a square on each side. And that looks like it got it into a good position, so I can just stick this wire through there in order to mount it, and that can flip up and rest on the tender behind it. And I've also formed the two back handrails, which I'll mount to there. I just need to drill the holes for them, but I won't actually install them until after the model is painted. Okay, just one more detail part to install to the engine. It's actually something that is not even shown in the instructions, and I've actually noticed the same thing missing from other Bowser Pennsylvania Railroad kits. It's the gutters that go along the top of the roof there. These are really easy to make. You just line a piece of wire up on there and clip that. I'll actually move it this way just a tiny bit. Clip that. So now it should be just the perfect length. Just gotta get some glue along that wire there. Doesn't have to cover the whole thing. Just needs to be enough to hold it on. Put that in place. There. Now that's in place. And once the glue is dry, that will be ready to handle. So now to move on to the tender. Now for the tender body, for the most part it's just more of the same, drilling some holes where needed, like to put on these grab irons, which I've formed from brass wire and then glued in place. It's a little hard to start the corners, so sometimes you just want to put maybe a really sharp and slightly larger drill bit onto a hand drill just so that you can really carefully start kind of a pinpoint hole. And then from there you can change to the smaller drill bit that you need to continue on in there. And that seems to help quite a bit with being more accurate with drilling into those corners. Now to form these railings, what I did was I just started at the top here, grabbed these with needle nose pliers and bent it around the pliers. That gave me a pretty good shape. I mean, it's not completely perfect, but it's certainly good enough. And then just made sure that was the right length, brought it down to here, bent that. And what I'm doing now is the coupler lift bar in back, which just uses the same parts as the front engine pilot, but because of the locations of these holes, I have the drill bit pretty far out on my hand drill there so that I can hold it at, let me turn it this way, so I can hold it at kind of an angle like that, so the holes don't go straight down. And because of that, I'm oversizing them just slightly, so that way the tabs can fit straight down into the holes, and they're still not so large that they'll be visible below the little lift bar stanchions. So yeah, that there will be exactly what's needed to get them in place and turn out looking nice. And now putting the marker lights onto the corners. Those holes were actually already pre-drilled on the tender body, even though they weren't included as part of the main kit. But even though they were pre-drilled, the holes were actually undersized a little bit. So with these, the marker lights are very delicate parts. I mean, you can see through right there. Those legs are extremely thin, very easy to damage if you handle these wrong. So you want the holes to be a little oversized so that you can really easily slip these in place while getting the glue in there. Once the glue is set, they'll hold in place just fine, but you don't want them to be a tight fit while you're installing them. Now for the steam and air hoses here, I ended up using plastic parts instead of brass. They were just a little cheaper, so that's why I got them. These don't actually have any tabs to go into drilled holes. They just glue directly to a flat surface, which is what I did here. So that means that the bond is a little bit weaker, unfortunately, but once this is on the chassis and rolling, nothing should really be touching those anyway, so they shouldn't have any problems with breaking or falling off, and if for some reason they do, they're very easy to glue back on. And now the final detail that I'm going to put on here is a couple of supports that go on the back of the coal deck here. So to do those, I'm just going to drill a couple holes in through the top there, slide some brass wires down, solder them in place, so they'll just be resting against here and attached at the top, and then I'll remove this piece for painting and then put it back on for the final assembly. Okay, both wires are soldered on. I'm just going to give that a quick one more shot with the little torch here to reflow the solder a little more. Okay, and then I'll give that a minute to cool, file it down nice and smooth. Okay, that turned out good. There's just enough solder in the holes and below to hold those wires in place firmly. So I was able to file and sand down the top there, nice and smooth. So now I'll remove that so I can paint that dark green and the rest of the top here red when it comes time to paint the model. And that finishes the super detailing work for this model. So in the next video, I'll be getting on to the painting and lettering and installing the final details.